my paper was on censorship and the spiral of silence, specifically how they appear in Twitter posts on social media. The major issues were filter bubbles and echo chambers, as well as personal censorship. So filter bubbles and echo chambers essentially means people's choices to only surround themselves with opinions and ideas that reinforce their own worldview. And personal censorship is attempting to silence opposition in order to reinforce your own echo chamber. So I did a lot of research on these topics, found in my literature review, found a lot of stuff that said that both reinforcing and contradictory opinions are important to making good political decisions. I also read a lot about sociological denial, which is when individuals in a society know something to be true or not true, but as a collective society they deny it. The most common example of this is the Emperor's New Clothes, if anyone's familiar with that, where everybody can tell that the Emperor is running around naked, but because each person says that he's wearing such nice clothes, they're all convinced they're the only ones who don't know. And so yeah, it all went into discussing my issue. And so to examine this, I turned to the interpersonal communications ethics, which governs the ethics behind communication between people. And more specifically, I use Stanley Beat's Keeping the Conversation Going framework. So this framework says that ethical communication should strive to encourage and stimulate genuine conversation. And my question was, to what extent does Beat's interpersonal conversation premise explain why public censorship is detrimental to genuine discourse? So the framework lays out 8 unethical communication practices that should be avoided if genuine discourse is to be achieved. They are freezing participants, which is ignoring individual differences, using stereotypes and labels to just shut down conversation. Disqualification, which is when you are dismissing views based on expertise or the qualification to be able to make that argument. Naturalization, which is when you discount any opposition because this is simply the way things are. Neutralization, which occurs when you distort the value of positions, where one person makes an argument and you say, oh, so what you're saying is kind of thing. Topical avoidance, which is just avoiding talking about issues that you just don't want to discuss. Meaning denial, which is subjectification of experience, which is when you discount opinions and experiences based on their subjective nature, like, oh, that's just your opinion kind of thing. And then meaning denial, which is where you make a self-contradictory claim. The book's example of this is yelling, I'm not yelling, or what you say contradicts what you mean. And then finally, pacification, in which you avoid discussion by over or underestimating the importance of the subject or its ability to be dealt with. So the way I approached researching this was by analyzing either popular or really controversial tweets. I decided to go with Twitter for social media specifically because they're all, it's very easy to find them, they're all archived really well, and they're small and simple enough that I could quickly analyze them and relate them to the 8 unethical practices. And so my findings were thus: for freezing participants, I found a tweet that said, I guarantee you that any man who hates radical feminism, hates the ideas radical feminists put forth, hates women, which is unethical because it freezes participants, regardless of where you stand on the actual issue. Saying that anyone who disagrees with you is just a woman hater freezes the participants, makes it impossible to actually discuss any of the disagreements you might have. So for disqualification, I found a tweet by an anti-gun control activist who said, I'm so sorry for what happened in Florida high school, but there's no way I'm letting the generation that was eating Tide Pods the week before tell us what we need to do about gun control. And so this unethically disqualifies an entire generation of people from voicing their opinions on gun control based off of nothing more than just a popular internet joke. An example of naturalization was in a conversation about the 2-party political system, in which one person just said, we have a 2-party system. which means elections are a binary choice. You can choose to vote for a third-party candidate, but it takes your vote away from the real race. And so this is unethical naturalization. It naturalizes the idea that the two-party system is just the way things are. There's no point trying to circumvent it or discuss issues with it because it's just the way things are going to be, and there's no point talking about it. So then for neutralization, I found a thread about the Dakota Access Pipeline. And one person's flawed argument in support of the pipe was simply, more than 1,000 certificates, permits, and approvals were granted for the hashtag Dakota Pipeline. So this is an attempt to neutralize the subject by claiming that the pipeline is okay. It's totally, it shouldn't be questioned because, you know, the government said it was okay, which is a problem because the government saying it's okay is exactly what the No Dapple people was saying was part of the issue. And then topical avoidance, I think, is actually super important, really relevant to this subject, but I had to skip it because I can't exactly observe someone not discussing something over Twitter. You know, like, I'm sure there are people who delete threads or block people who disagree with them, but I can't empirically show that over a tweet the way I could the others. And so anyways, subjectification of experience. There was this thread about illegal immigration, and one guy said something defending closed borders, and it had its own unethical implications on its own, but I was looking at the response, which said, wow, mediocre white boy whose opinions are irrelevant has nothing to do but show his lack of knowledge, which is also an unethical response to what he said, because it claims his entire argument is completely invalid simply because it's his opinion. It also doesn't even, so that means it doesn't deserve to be argued, it doesn't need to be refuted, because it's just a subjective opinion. And she doesn't even say why it showed a lack of knowledge, so she was not keeping the conversation going. And meaning denial, of course, what discussion about unethical tweeting would be complete without something from President Donald Trump, who used meaning denial when he asked, why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat? Which obviously implies that he is calling him short and fat. Meaning denial right there. And then finally, pacification, which is literally trying to say that there's no point talking about a subject because talking about it's not going to solve anything, it's not going to improve, it's not going to accomplish anything. And I found a tweet that actually said, all I got to say is talking about problems never gets anything resolved, so why talk? Like he practically quoted the definition of pacification as his argument. And so yes, in conclusion, 7 of the 8 practices were empirically observed and analyzed in tweets, and I arrived at the conclusion that Stanley Dietz' framework shows that this kind of social media discourse is very unethical and very harmful to social progress. If we want to actually solve problems and get people to agree on things, we need to keep talking about them, keep the conversation going instead of just trying to shut down anyone who disagrees with us, regardless of where we stand on the moral high ground. And this is all in accordance with all the other literature I was able to find on the subject, saying that reinforcing ideas are very important, but so are contradictory. If you can't see the other side, if you can't even discuss with the other side, there's no way any progress is ever going to be made. There's no way we're ever going to find common ground. And this other research was, all the other research, this was in accordance with it. It didn't have anything to do with social media, though, was the issue I had with it. And so I thought, social media, Twitter, Facebook, all that, it's becoming a very socially relevant way of looking at conversation and discourse. It's quickly becoming the new public sphere. This is how people find new ideas and talk about new ideas and debate. And so I thought doing it from this perspective made a new way of looking at the whole topic, which is very, very socially applicable nowadays. And for future research, I thought it would be a good idea to look at other forms of social media, Facebook, YouTube comments, there's all kinds of places where people do this exact same thing. I also thought it would be a good idea to look at free speech issues. There's been a lot of that coming up lately with hate speech versus free speech, stuff on college campuses. There was riots happening just whenever the dominant group of people, when someone wants to give a speech or something that is contrary to what they believe, they throw a fit, they throw riots and use violence to try and shut that down. That's been happening on both sides of the political spectrum. And I also thought it would be a really good idea to look at these same perspectives that I use, but kind of flip-flop the sides I went on. Like, for example, there was the gun control one. I'm sure pro-gun control people are just as guilty of using these same kind of things. Same with when I looked at the feminist problem, it's not like I'm trying to say that feminism is what should be critiqued. It was just this specific example. So I thought it would be a good idea to, whenever I had to go to one side, to try and look at it from the other side too, because that's kind of the whole purpose of this research in the first place, was to not get so entrenched in your own ideology that you can't even discuss the other sides. Thank you.
I'm not sure how to turn this off. How do I turn this off?
I think so.